Sometimes you have to see to believe and witness history as it unfolds. When the news is breaking, watch with the newsroom of The Washington Post. We explain what's happening and why it matters. Thank you for choosing to watch the headlines as they're being written by our journalists. You can subscribe with a special offer at washingtonpost.com/watch. Subscribing through that link lets everyone here, from the front lines to the control room, know that you care about our continued efforts to inform the public, protect the First Amendment, and foster a healthy democracy. We could not do this without you.
Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama returned to the White House today for the unveiling of their official portraits. Welcome to this special report from the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. Well, this afternoon's portrait unveiling is a return not just of familiar faces, but also of tradition, a tradition abandoned during the Trump years. It will be in the East Room of the White House and feature a cadre of former Obama staffers on hand for the occasion. With me in the studio today is James Hohman. Hannah Jewell is outside the White House. Reporters Rhonda Colvin and Tyler Pager are live at the unveiling in the East Room. And we're joined by not one, but two Pulitzer Prize-winning critics. Art and architecture critic Philip Kennicott, and joining us from New York, senior critic at large Robin Gavon. Welcome to all of you. And let's go first to national video reporter Hannah Jewell outside of the White House. Hannah, what is the significance of today's portrait unveiling?
Well, Libby, today's ceremony is slightly unusual in that it has been the first one in about 10 years, a little over 10 years, this tradition, as you said. For the past few decades, current presidents have invited their predecessors and first ladies to come and witness the unveiling of their official White House portraits. Trump never extended such an invitation to the Obamas, which is why it has taken so long after the conclusion of his presidency for this to happen today. We're going to see the official White House portrait of former President Barack Obama and also a portrait of Michelle Obama. This will be Michelle Obama's first visit back to the White House since it was her home in January 2017, and it will be Barack Obama's only second visit. He was there in April earlier this year to mark the 12th anniversary of the passing of the Affordable Care Act. So traditionally, the president and the first lady also choose the artist who is going to depict them and give some guidance about how they would like to be shown. So we're going to get a glimpse today of how Obama and how the Obamas view their own legacy.
Hannah, what's the difference between these White House portraits and the famous portraits of the Obamas that we've seen before?
Right. So people may remember those famous portraits, which were extremely popular, were unveiled in 2018 by the artists Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, and have been touring the country ever since they were unveiled. Those belong to the Smithsonian and the National Portrait Gallery. So whereas these are the White House portraits that will hang in the White House, traditionally the most recent two presidents hang in the Grand Foyer. There's no word yet about the unveiling of a Trump portrait. So Barack Obama will join today George W. Bush and be replacing Clinton in that spot in the White House. These paintings are actually moved around in the White House between presidencies according to each new president's, political beliefs and heroes and ideologies. So while this has been a traditional display of nonpartisanship at times, there's also, of course, always politics at play in where these paintings end up in the White House, and of course, who does or does not invite whom to the White House for a ceremony like the one we're going to see today.
Excellent. Hannah Jewell, thank you so much. Let's go now to Rhonda Colvin, who is at the White House today for the portrait unveiling. So, Rhonda, as we've heard from Hannah, it's been a while since we've seen one of these events. Refresh our memories about what this might look like today.
Yeah, it certainly has been a gap since the last one. So if people are unfamiliar with what this looks like, we all may need a refresher. But typically, this doesn't last long, maybe about a half hour, and you'll see both the current president and the president who's unveiling the artwork come in together. The current president, Joe Biden, will give a speech about that former president's highlights, the legacy that they left, some of the big items that they got through Congress and other hallmarks of their career. in their administration. You're also going to see the former first couple unveil the artwork themselves. And here's another tidbit that many people may not know. The artist who works on the First Lady's portrait as well as the President's portrait, that is a closely guarded secret until the event is underway. So that's something that is not yet public, but both portraits were done by separate artists. So we'll learn who those folks are in this event. And then you'll also hear that former first couple talk. They will likely talk about their relationship to this institution, the White House. Both Michelle and Barack Obama have often talked about how this was also a home for them, and not only a workplace, but it's where they raised their two daughters. So this is going to be something that is less political than what we're used to covering, but it is sort of a tradition, in Washington. It has been for many years. As Hannah pointed out, there is a distinction between this portrait as well as the one that hangs in the wing of the National Portrait Gallery. And one of the differences is this is commissioned by the White House Historical Association. During a president's presidency, they usually interview artists who they want to eventually do their portrait. They choose one, and then that association does all the rest of the work and eventually gets it here to be hung in the White House. So that's basically what we can expect today. I'm standing outside of the briefing room. Media we're waiting here to be let into the East Room around 1:15. I can tell you from some of the conversations I've overheard with a lot of folks who are here regularly, this is a larger group of media, and that's usually expected when President Obama or other former presidents come to the White House.
Well, Rhonda will be living vicariously through you as you are in the East Room today. Let's go now to Robin Givhan, the Washington Post senior critic at large, and she covered former First Lady Michelle Obama during her early years in the White House. Robin, what will you be watching for today? And I'm interested in your eye on everything from the art to just the atmosphere and the experience.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see the kind of sort of thought process that went into the selection of the artist, particularly with former First Lady Michelle Obama, who was very particular about wanting to elevate lesser-known designers during her time in the White House. And I think it'll be interesting to see if she wants to do the same thing with the artists that she's chosen. I think it also will be interesting to see how she's attired in her portrait, because that was also something that she used to tell stories, to weave narratives about the country and how she saw her own place within the country. And I'm also curious to look at, obviously the president's portrait, because this is so much about the office of the presidency, more so than I think the individual. It's the way in which this person has shaped the office. But I also think that these portraits are in many ways a sort of reflection of the American people as well during a particular moment in our history.
Let's bring in Philip Kennicott on that point. Philip, there's certainly the question of how the artist portrays the individuals. How much do you look at these as pieces of artwork versus pieces of history?
Well, of course, they're both, and that's the challenge. I think that's the big question I have, waiting to see the paintings when they're unveiled. When the Obamas decided to go with two African-American artists to paint their portraits for the National Portrait Gallery, they chose people who came out of the contemporary art world, people who could certainly make a fine portrait, but who had real sort of credibility and cachet within the art world. And that was a bit of a break. If you go to the National Portrait Gallery and you look at the Hall of Presidents, there are only a couple of moments when you think, wow, that's an artistic moment and a historical document. Most of the portraits come out of a much more conservative tradition. So for the White House portraits, do they want these to seem of a piece with the other White House portraits, which are by and large fairly conservative, or will they once again opt for artists who break and sort of expand the language of portraiture?
James Hohmann, so much goes into not just the artwork itself, but of course where it lives in the White House. So talk to us about what happens to these portraits after today.
Well, they'll move into the grand foyer, and you do see, as Hannah was mentioning, politics shaping these considerations. A lot of thought goes into what kind of message you want to convey. This is the president's home. It's the people's house. And ultimately, it's like your own home. Where do you want to put the paintings that people see when they walk into your house? And so we've seen over time significant changes in that respect, where Ronald Reagan, when he became president, replaced Thomas Jefferson and Harry Truman, considered Democratic leaders, with Dwight Eisenhower and Calvin Coolidge. When Bill Clinton took office 12 years later, he replaced Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan in a prominent space with Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. When Joe Biden became president, he personally put a lot of thought, working with John Meacham and others, into what the Oval Office would look like. And he got rid of the portrait of Andrew Jackson that was hanging there during the Trump years. Andrew Jackson, responsible for the Trail of Tears, a genocide of Indians, and instead put a painting of Benjamin Franklin, and the idea was that he wanted to follow the science, and Benjamin Franklin was our first great scientist. He also put a painting of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton next to each other. Anyone who's seen the musical Hamilton knows that those two gentlemen hated each other, but that they worked together in the early days of the country. And Biden wanted to remind himself every day that you have to hear from people with opposing views before you make policy, because in Biden's thinking, it makes the policy better. So there's a lot of thought that goes into the locations. Obviously, for Joe Biden, Barack Obama is very much a shadow over his presidency, having served 8 years as Obama's vice president.
So James, talk to us about the relationships in the room today and what you'll be watching for in terms of those relationships of the primary actors today, but also everyone else in the room.
Yeah, it's only the second time that Barack Obama's been to the White House since January 2017, the day Trump was inaugurated. A few months ago, it was kind of like a homecoming when Obama came back and everyone wanted selfies with both of the presidents. Obama joked, "Good to see you, Vice President Biden," which some people took as a joke that was maybe too cutting. But this is the first time that Michelle Obama is back. And it is going to be interesting to see, it's going to have a college reunion vibe. We certainly will see a lot of collegiality. These are always funny. There's always good jokes that come out of them. And we're also going to see a lot of Obama veterans who now work for Joe Biden. When you think about the kind of the Biden administration, it's not just Biden, but Dennis McDonough, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, was Obama's chief of staff. Susan Rice, who was Obama's national security advisor, is Biden's domestic policy counsel. So there's a lot of people who served both presidents.
Let's go to Rhonda Colvin, who will be in the East Room today. Rhonda, talk to us about why now. I mean, because we know that Donald Trump chose not to do this, but Joe Biden's been president for a while. Why now?
That's right, and these portraits have been finished for a while. We do know that back during the Trump administration, from reporting from sources familiar with Obama and Trump, that both men did not prefer to have this type of ceremony together. We don't know anything beyond that. But we also know that Biden did announce last summer that he wanted to have this ceremony with Obama like it was in the older days before the pandemic. So that's one of the reasons they did delay this, is they wanted to have a full room, basically. The White House had COVID restrictions, of course, and in terms of how many people they would allow in. And they wanted this event to be something that was worthy of the history that it is making. And so they wanted the room to be a little fuller than it would have been perhaps during the beginning of the Biden administration when COVID restrictions were in place. So that is what we do know about why there was a delay for this ceremony after these portraits were done.
Robin Gavin, we just heard a moment ago conversation about Barack Obama's only other trip to the White House since leaving office. Talk to us more about that occasion and what your observations were of it.
Well, I think it reminded us of two things. And one, we sort of are reminded of these traditions that, that are really founded in a kind of civility and decorum. And, that was very reassuring. But at the same time, I think sometimes these traditions obscure the real frailties and the issues that arise during presidencies. I mean, I think when we saw Obama in the White House last, there was this sort of warm, nostalgic glow that particularly a lot of Democrats were feeling. But it was also sort of a reminder of how we had gotten to a very contentious, divided populace. It was a reminder that in many ways that was, sort of sowed some of the seeds that we're dealing with now. And I think as we look at the portraits, one of the things that I'm always struck by is, you look at that long gallery, that long history of presidential portraits, official presidential portraits, and they really celebrate a very sort of victorious, grand idea of the presidency, and they really obscure a lot of the weaknesses, and they sort of lull us, I think, a little bit into this idea that, there is the presidency is always perfect, that it's always valiant, that there is always valor there. And we sort of forget the human frailties. This is certainly a celebratory moment for Obama and the Obama administration, but it really is also, I think, a chance to sort of consider how we understand the presidency.
Philip Kennicott, let's go to you for more on what we expect from portraits that hang in the White House and their personality or potentially lack of personality for someone who sort of just looks at that wall of, most of them, what feel like sort of very old, traditional white guy paintings.
Right. When we look at a portrait, we bring to it a lot of our own assumptions about who that person was. We bring to it our prejudices and our biases, and we in a sense, test the portrait to whether those things are confirmed or undermined or exaggerated. So, when I think about the choices that the Obamas have to make here, you have to consider all the things that would be potential things they want as part of their legacy. Do they emphasize their youth? Because Obama is one of the youngest presidents to come in. Do they emphasize the wisdom of having sort of been through 8 years? The fact that he's the first African-American president, is there a reference to that? Does he reference his accomplishments? It was not uncommon in the older kind of portraits for there to be little props and things around that might reference what a president did or liked, his hobbies, that kind of thing. There's a whole set of questions. How much you want to give away, how personal you want to be, how much you want to be simply seen as a kind of continuum of the office. All of these questions are really pertinent with the Obamas. I think of the former president as one of the most punctilious about the decorum of the office. So part of me wonders, will this be a very, very formal portrait? On the other hand, we can see from the choices they made with the portraits of the National Portrait Gallery that they also broke some rules and they were willing to take some chances. So will they go that line? Will this be a kind of moment where the White House portrait tradition takes a turn in a different direction?
And Philip, those National Portrait Gallery portraits have been on tour. And tell us about the reception and the interest of the American public to see them.
These are truly exceptional in terms of the response they've had. You'd probably have to go back to the original portraits of the Founding Fathers, which became kind of celebrity objects, to find a similar level of enthusiasm for images. And that's really fascinating because we live in an age where there's no paucity of images of the Obamas. There must be millions, billions, maybe tens of billions of images of them. And yet these portraits became a place for people to go and I think sort of reckon with what they wanted to think about this country through the prism of the Obamas. There's a very famous image of a young African-American girl, I think, looking up at one of these portraits and, in a sense, seeing herself reflected. I think there were others who went back and wanted to believe that the Obamas represented a different era in politics, maybe something, a nostalgic glow for a slightly more civil era. And then I think there are people who probably are still going to see them because they are just actually fairly exceptional images. Both of the artists who did them made fairly compelling images, especially the image of Michelle Obama by Amy Sherald. This is a magnificent painting by any measure, even if you don't know who Michelle Obama is.
Let's bring in Tyler Pager, White House reporter for The Washington Post. He joins us on the line from outside of the East Room. So, Tyler, let's talk about the people in the room today. You've been looking at the relationship between the Biden and Obama camps and some of the complications that have grown over the years. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so we're expecting to have a whole slew of former Obama administration officials here for the event, as well as a lot of current White House staff who served in the Obama administration. There's obviously a lot of overlap between the two. Just walking around the White House today, there's a lot of former officials looking at their own desk, walking through the West Wing, and just sort of reminiscing about the Obama years. And I'm sure we will hear a lot more about that when the former president and the current president speak ahead of the unveiling. But kind of a jubilant atmosphere here today at the White House so far.
What's the relationship like between the president and the former president, Tyler?
Yeah, so during the Obama presidency, there was a lot of memes and photos and jokes about sort of a bromance between the president and then vice president. I think, officials say that is slightly exaggerated in terms of the relationship, but they did have a very close working professional relationship, and they say the two men do remain in contact. The former president called President Biden shortly after the Inflation Reduction Act passed to congratulate him. Obviously, Obama was here in May in the spring to celebrate the anniversary of the signing of the Affordable Care Act, his signature domestic policy achievement. So, they definitely do have a strong friendship. I think the idea that some have suggested that they're, best friends hanging out all the time is a little exaggerated, but they definitely do have a strong working relationship and one that did turn into somewhat of a personal friendship in the later years.
So might we see more of former President Obama and his wife, Michelle Obama, as we head into the midterms in a more public role, either here at the White House or in some other capacity, serving the Democratic operations?
Yeah, for sure. The former president is expected to head out on the campaign trail closer to Election Day. He has a slate of fundraisers as well for the DNC and the committees to elect House Democrats and Senate Democrats scheduled throughout the rest of the fall. And so we're fully expected to see him, also appear in some key states. They haven't exactly advised where he'd go, but it wouldn't be a surprise to see him in states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, maybe Arizona, the states where there are competitive governor and Senate races. And Obama still has that star power, still someone that Democrats clamor to see on the campaign trail. And aides tell me they fully expect him to revise that role ahead of the midterm.
Tyler Pager there at the White House for The Washington Post. Let's go back to Hannah Jewell, who's outside of the White House. So, Hannah, let's talk about how these ceremonies have gone in the past.
Well, Libby, these are often opportunities for former presidents and even former political rivals to share a moment of bipartisanship and also moments of levity. For example, when George W. Bush attended the unveiling of his official White House portrait 10 years ago, he had some words of advice for Michelle Obama. Let's take a look at that moment from 2012.
When the British burned the White House, as Fred mentioned, in 1814, Dolly Madison famously saved this portrait of the first George W. Now, Michelle, if anything happens, there's your man.
So given what we know about the warm, public-facing relationship between Biden and Obama, we are sure to hear similar such lines and moments of humor like that. Libby?
All right, thanks so much, Hannah. James, how illustrative of the relationship is a moment like this? I mean, because there is really the question of how much does a current president consult with, ask for inspiration from, lean on a former president, and there's a lot of pride here on all parties wanting to both see how their legacy is reflected, participate, but also be viewed as their own individual president.
Pride is exactly right. And you think about a painting of yourself, it also invites vanity. It's literally how history will remember you. For our presidents who were there before photography, this is literally, Philip was saying that we have billions of pictures of Obama, which is right. And for someone like Abraham Lincoln, there's just not that many images of him. despite his great consequence. And so you do care deeply about your place in history, and this is a big piece of it. This is how a lot of people will engage with you. And Joe Biden has been intent to show he is his own man. He has been careful not to be seen as following Obama's advice too much or seeking his counsel. They do not talk that regularly, despite sort of the public image of the bromance. And so it'll be interesting to see that dynamic, because Obama is thinking about his own legacy. Obviously, anyone who's ever had a job where someone comes after you, you always, you want to give them space to succeed. And Obama has tried to do that with Biden as well. He's never spoken publicly in any kind of critical way, even when he's expressed some of those frustrations in private ways.
Robin Gavin, we've been talking, and we see this image here of the Clintons and their portrait unveiling. We've been talking certainly about the relationship between President Biden, former President Obama, but you've also been talking to us about the role of Michelle Obama and the role of the First Ladies. Talk to us about the First Lady's legacy, Michelle Obama's legacy, and where she will literally be on display here in the White House, where that portrait will go.
Well, I mean, I think it can't be overstated that, this is the first African-American First Lady. And, that alone is incredibly disruptive of the narrative that preceded her. And, I think so many people will be looking at this portrait not just to understand sort of the role of the First Lady writ large, but also I think they'll be looking at it to see the way in which, this Black woman who was so often attacked because of just her physical presence, to see how that is going to be presented, to see how that will have a place of honor within the White House. And, I think that will be one of the things that will be perhaps the most compelling aspect of this portrait, but also is certainly her enduring legacy. I mean, you can add in, her Let's Move campaign, her emphasis on veterans, on wellness. All of those things are part of her legacy. But the one that is the most far-reaching is simply her very presence, the fact that this was a descendant of slaves, of enslaved people who was in the White House.
Robin, what will you be watching for today in terms of the pomp and circumstance and in terms of the body language and the representation of the people who are actually there?
Well, I'm always curious to see the way in which, the celebrants are sort of present themselves. I think it'll be interesting to see if the former president has the sort of familiar sort of swagger and confidence that he, was known for. And I also think that, again, the issue of race certainly comes up. And I'll be curious to see if that is overtly referenced by the president in his remarks. And I think it'll be interesting to see the relationship certainly between the president and, the former First Lady, and, see if that sort of sense of partnership comes through in the way that they present themselves today.
And Robin, we heard that joke from former President George W. Bush about, hey, if anything happens to this building, Michelle Obama, you know which portrait to grab, which is so funny. But then, of course, since then, the Capitol has actually been attacked by Americans. And it sort of brings this chill of like, well, if, sculptures in that building, portraits in that building could have been irreparably damaged when people attacked it. Do you think that the concerns about democracy and collegiality, can we overlook on a day like today these sort of existential questions America is wrestling with and just have a joyful day, or does that also have to be part of the conversation today?
Well, I think, any day that art is celebrated in the White House is a good day. But I don't think that you can really divorce that from the context in which we're viewing these portraits. And, and I think it's significant that, we're looking at portraits. We're not looking at photographs. And, photographs have been sort of the placeholders until these official portraits will be unveiled. And there is something that is particularly slow and meditative even about the idea of a portrait, the idea that you sit for a portrait. It's something that is very considered. And I think that sort of serves us well in this moment because it does provide an opportunity for us to sit for a moment with the idea of democracy and the fact that it isn't assured, that it is very tenuous and delicate and fragile. And I think in many ways, the portraits are sort of symbolic of that because as much as they do reflect the individuals, they also really speak to the sense of continuity, the sense of the slow movement of history, the sense that all of this is very much connected.
Let's go back to Rhonda Colvin, who is at the White House today, and she'll be in the East Room for this portrait unveiling. So, Rhonda, take us through what we're going to see over the next little while.
Yeah, that's right. We're still waiting to be let into the East Room, and a lot of reporters are gathered for this. And also, as we've been talking, this event is drawing former administration officials. Just a few moments ago, standing next to me was Valerie Jarrett. She came to meet and greet some folks in the area that I'm waiting in, and she was one of the senior advisors in the Obama White House. So again, this does look sort of like that high school or college reunion for many people. What we will likely see today is both the former president and the current president walk in together. Biden will give a speech and talk about the highlights of the Obama administration. You might hear things about his work on the Affordable Care Act and other highlights of his 8 years in office. And then the Obamas will stand up and unveil the artwork. And we will also learn who the artists were behind these portraits. And then the former first couple, will each have words to say if this follows the usual template for this type of event. But it is something that I think a lot of people are getting, the press aides are announcing that we're going to be let in soon, if you're hearing that. So I'll wrap up now, but it looks like we're just moments away from starting this.
All right, Rhonda, take us with you. We look forward to seeing what happens with you there in the East Room. James, there's a lot for President Biden to highlight about his predecessor's legacy because it is also his own legacy and it's his party's legacy. The big interruption, of course, is Donald Trump, not part of this at all, not someone who continued this tradition. Where's the bipartisanship?
Yeah, it really, it's funny. Barack Obama gave an interview during his final week in the White House where he said he thought he would have a good working relationship with Trump and that because Trump was new to politics and had never held elected office before, our first president in U.S. history had never held elected office or been in the military, that they would have a conversation. He thought very much that Trump would sort of grow into the role. And a few weeks later, Trump was saying that Obama should be locked up and accusing him of spying on him. So no love lost there, and if you made a list of the norms that Trump violated during his years as president, this wouldn't be in the top 50, but it still is fairly significant. I will say though, Libby, this is not the first time that we haven't seen this sort of tradition followed. Jimmy Carter asked the Reagan folks not to have him in. He didn't want to have an event with Ronald Reagan, who had defeated him in a pretty negative 1980 campaign. And Richard Nixon, of course, who resigned in disgrace during Watergate, his portrait was unveiled in 1981, but they didn't open it up to press. It was done without fanfare, kind of a quiet ceremony, because Reagan didn't want to tie himself to the political albatross of Richard Nixon.
Got some images there from the East Room. Philip Kennicott, I am so eager to talk to you after we see the portraits to get your impressions of them. We're going to do a little art critiquing on the spot. I want to talk to you about the symbolism in portraits of the past. One that really comes to mind is the portrait of President Kennedy. Someone, of course, who was assassinated in office, died in office. And that portrait has a very specific tone. Talk to us about how the paintings can reflect how those individuals individuals served in office and also how they left office.
Right. Well, if we think of the two portraits of Kennedy, the one that's probably the most famous is the Aaron Schickler portrait that was made after the assassination. And it is a tragic photograph. Kennedy's head is bowed, and he almost seems to be kind of fading in to the background in the painting, as if he literally is sort of dissipating into history in some ways. And of course, that was the only kind of image you could make of Kennedy at that time and at that moment. But if you go back and you look at the image in the National Portrait Gallery by Elaine de Kooning, which was also finished after Kennedy's death, but it was painted from life before he was assassinated. It is a very vibrant portrait. It's in reds and greens and oranges. It has this kind of tropical Florida feel, which is where I believe that the president sat for her. And it emphasizes a kind of restlessness and vitality. Those two aspects of Kennedy existed side by side until the moment of his assassination. I mean, he was that vibrant person until he was killed. And when you see those two portraits together, you realize, I think, what Robin was saying, the fragility of these things in this democracy.
So we see there, Philip, the paintings. I'm looking off screen because I have a large screen that I can watch here off to the side. We see there those blue coverings over those portraits. Talk to us about the unveiling and sort of why we have this public ceremony of unveiling in the way that, for example, Richard Nixon did not have.
Right. Well, if you go back in time, there was actually a tradition of unveilings as kind of public events. People would go and they'd take seats and they'd watch them. This is an age in which images are much less common, and a painter might work for years to create kind of the ideal representation. I think now it's a little less, I don't know, there's a little less of that old kind of aura about it. But it is always interesting to pull down a curtain and see yourself standing back, life-size or greater than life-size. That has to be disconcerting. And if you look at the image that we just saw a little earlier of the two portraits still draped, you see the famous Lansdowne portrait of George Washington right next to them. And I believe that's Martha off to the other side. Here you are, flanked by the father and the mother of the country. This is about taking your place in the pantheon, and I think there must be a certain set of jitters, even for somebody who's been on the public stage as long as the Obamas have been.
James Homan, let's talk about some of the familiar faces that are in this crowd today.
There's Kathleen Sebelius, Libby, standing up and walking to lean over to talk to someone. You saw Sean Donovan. I think that's John Podesta right there, sitting next to Sean Donovan, who was the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, ran unsuccessfully last year for mayor of New York. John Podesta there has actually just returned to the White House to be in charge of the spending for the environment. That was in the infrastructure bill, or I'm sorry, in the new reconciliation bill that just passed. Kathleen Sebelius, obviously the Health and Human Services Secretary, former Kansas governor who implemented the ACA. We just saw right off camera two of Obama's former chiefs of staff, including Richard Daley. There's Austin Goolsbee with his head to the left, the first chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. There's Dick Durbin, the number 2 in Senate Democratic leadership. He is the Democratic senator from Barack Obama's home state of Illinois, a key early supporter of Obama's presidential aspirations in 2008. It really is a mix of a lot of people. You see some current Obama staffers. There's, I think we saw Karine Jean-Pierre there a second ago. You see some members of Congress over there. Penny Pritzker, who was Obama's Secretary of Commerce, I saw a second ago.
James, I feel like we could just do a who's who with you, just like mapping out the room. I want to go to Robin Gavon for this question of like nostalgia and what it's like for these individuals to be in the room who served for perhaps as many as 8 years under the former president.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it feels a little bit like, old school, homeschool reunion, that sort of thing. But I mean, I think it's also important that it really is a moment in which, sort of the exclamation point is put on sort of the historical nature of that administration. I mean, it's a moment when, this is something that is lasting. It's going to be, part of this long legacy. It's grand. It has roots that date back to the beginning of this country, and I think that has to be an incredible weight and an incredible sense of, you already know, sort of what it has meant, but I think this just sort of underscores it and puts it in real terms.
James, I'm not sure if you rattled this name off as you were going through the list, but also Sylvia Burwell, who's now the head of American University, also a former secretary of HHS. The health care law that President Obama was able to get signed and enacted ended up becoming a real linchpin of his presidency, and also something that he took a hit for early on in elections, but then ended up being a win for elections. How much is that on the mind of people in this room, a lot of them Democrats, who would like to see some success at the polls this November?
It's top of mind, and it's one of the reasons that there's tension is that between the Obama folks and the Biden world. President Biden has said publicly a couple times now that he is not going to make the mistakes that Democrats made in 2010, where they weren't aggressively selling the health care law. They weren't aggressively talking about what they did on the economic recovery and the stimulus coming out of the Great Recession. And it has been sort of frustrating for Obama and others to hear that, because they feel like they did sell it, that it wasn't an issue of them not going out there and talking about it enough. And a lot of the faces that we're seeing were very involved in the economic response to the 2008 recession. That also top of mind for Biden right now, as the Federal Reserve signaling today that they're going to raise rates another 3/4 of a point. We're facing, the highest inflation since the early 1980s. Biden is having to manage a lot of those same dynamics. You also see, Libby, that there's sort of the left and the center of the Democratic Party. We saw Julian Castro a minute ago in the crowd there. He was the Housing and Urban Development Secretary under Obama. He ran for president in 2020, and in one memorable debate moment during the Democratic primaries, attacked Joe Biden as senile in a moment that really backfired on Castro. Frankly, ended up dooming his presidential campaign. But he is much more from the left of the party than Joe Biden. But we're a country with two big tent parties, and the Obama administration alumni network really runs the gamut from the Tim Geithner kind of Wall Street aligned set to much more liberal kind of crowd, which we also see in the room.
Our Rhonda Colvin is in there as well, and she tells us that it's standing room only and quite crowded. And this really goes back to what she was saying earlier about the Biden White House wanting this to be a proper ceremony with less COVID restrictions. Robin, what do you read on sort of the optics of this moment in terms of just trying to get back to a quote unquote normal?
Well, I think it shows a real desire for conviviality and celebration, and not just celebration for a particular president, but really celebration, for civic life and what it means to be to embrace public service. I think part of what you see in that room is this idea of coming together. And obviously that is something that has been a rare thing in these last few years. So I think it would have been, it just would have underscored that if this had been a celebration that was marked by scarcity of people. This really speaks to a time past, and I suspect it's meant to also speak to where we can eventually get to again.
Philip Kennicott, let's go to you for the symbolism of this moment, the crowd in the room, the people who are gathered there, and the experience of, we're all gathered here for art. Right, we're all gathered here for politics, but we're also, Philip, gathered here for the unveiling of artwork.
Right. I will echo what Robin said a few minutes ago about any time there's art going on in the White House, that's to be celebrated. And I certainly doubly endorse that. But I would argue that probably even more important than the paintings today is the ceremony we're about to witness, for all the reasons that others have elicited here. It's really important that a president can live with images of his predecessors, that he can cohabit a space that is as wide as the country itself in terms of its symbolism. And so even though this is a Democratic administration hosting a former Democratic president, by reinvigorating this ceremony, I hope at least they reinvigorate that sense that the person who lives in that house is obliged to keep the doors open to everyone.
Philip, what will you be watching for today?
Well, the usual first jokes and the fake bonhomie and all of the kind of Washington shtick, that'll be there. I suppose I'll watch very closely to see if there's any surprise. It's not clear how these paintings were made. Some artists will work very closely with the subjects of a portrait. Others will simply take a photograph and go and kind of work on their own. I don't know whether or not the president or the former president or Mrs. Obama have actually seen these works yet. So I'm curious to see what their faces say.
Well, the question that has been on everyone's minds, who are the artists that the Obamas selected to paint their official portraits? And James, we can now reveal some names.
Yeah, Libby, that's right. We have learned that Robert McCurdy painted President Obama, and Sharon Sprung, an established New York artist, captured Mrs. Obama. Mr. McCurdy is famous for his minimalist, sort of photorealist paintings. Sharon Sprung, well known for painting prominent women, including Jeanette Rankin, the first member of Congress, and others.
The Vice President of the United States and Second Gentleman, Douglas Emhoff.
All right, we're listening now. We hear the Vice President and First Gentleman being announced into the room. Okay, Philip Kennicott, tell us more about the artists that have been selected.
Well, Robert McCurdy is the better known of the two to me. He's got a very signature style. It's a very bare bones, just the person. No props, no background. I don't want to say what we're going to see. He may break with his own style. I am I'm more curious about the First Ladies because I'm less familiar with Sprung's work. So I'm waiting to see.
We are live in the East Room. You see a packed house there. We'll be going live to our colleagues afterwards for some analysis, a live critique from Philip Kennicott after we see these portraits unveiled. I'd also especially like to thank Robin Gavon for being with us during this time. She covered former First Lady Michelle Obama, of course, is also a Pulitzer Prize-winning critic, and we have benefited from her insights today. James Hohmann will be with me, as well as Rhonda Colvin, who is there in that room preparing to watch this moment of both art history as well as American history as we see these portraits unveiled. James, what does this moment mean, not to the Obamas so much as the Bidens? We talked a lot about what it's like to have the Obamas back. What does this mean to the Bidens?
Well, at a moment like this, you always think about your own legacy. Joe Biden is almost 2 years in to his presidency. He has the midterms coming up. He's thinking about, how am I going to be remembered in a decade?
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Dr. Jill Biden, accompanied by the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama, and Mrs. Michelle Obama.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, President Obama, Mrs. Obama, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this ceremony. I'm John Rogers, the chairman of the White House Historical Association, and on behalf of the women and men of the association, I'm thrilled to celebrate with all of you the presentation of two magnificent American portraits today to honor and commemorate the indelible legacy of our 44th President and First Lady. Mrs. Obama, President Obama, it is a privilege to be able to carry forward this time-honored tradition of unveiling the official portraits and welcome them to the White House to be forever accessible and viewed by the public on these historic walls. Since its founding in 1961 by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, the White House Historical Association has been of service and our privilege to be able to acquire official portraits of those who previously were missing from the White House collection and to commission all of the portraits on record of each President and First Lady since our founding. Surviving the modern era of photography and film and technology, few mediums can transport us with such immediacy and intimacy than the American portrait, capturing at once the power, the restraint, the courage, and the beauty of the human spirit. The portraits of our first family stand apart, each a painstaking exploration of a singular person, a human life conveyed in still, otherwise ever in motion and fulfilling the obligations to their oath. More than just the unveiling of our assemblage today, it's integral to the broader set of symbols and rituals and emblematic gestures distinctly American that sustain the spirit and the standing of our republic, bridging one presidency to the next the way we do one generation to the next, honoring the past as much as we look to the future. As we become more culturally and demographically diverse with ideas that are both molten and disparate pertaining to the future of our nation, our work to ensure the promise of what President Obama once called the unlikely story that is America has never been more intertwined with preserving what has been symbolically and foundationally at the heart of our storied resilience as a nation. And in this way, today is a reminder that America is governed not by a disconnected series of presidents, but rather by the enduring presidency. And within the greater story that's told by the 43 other portraits, we boldly celebrate their contrast and their confluence, certainly artistically, but also as distinguished chapters in the American narrative. And notably today, as the first Black American first family at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and with whom we shared the joy of watching your wonderful daughters grow up here and come of age. Mrs. Obama, we thank you for your advocacy on behalf of this House and for making it possible for visitors to take pictures of these magnificent portraits among the other historic artifacts throughout the White House. I had the personal privilege of being with you and your mom when we inducted your inaugural gown into the Smithsonian collection. And may I say that the beauty of that white chiffon gown is only exceeded by the woman who wore it, and whose spirit is captured in this portrait. The tradition of service continues with Dr. Biden. She's our steward. We are honored that you were with us when we celebrated our 60th anniversary, and we look forward to our continued work with you on the educational mission of our association. And we are ever thankful to you and you, Mr. President, for hosting this wonderful ceremony today. And to our artists, Robert McCurdy and Sharon Sprung, we are grateful for your artisanship and dedication to your own craft. Together, these portraits fulfill a beautiful collaboration and are a testament to what's possible when we serve one another in an effort to give voice to one another. And I suspect that beginning tomorrow, these two portraits will be the most photographed by visitors from across the United States and the world. And it's now my pleasure to introduce an admirer of great institutions and national treasures, the President of the United States of America.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. That was great. Thank you all very much. Please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please. Thank you, John Rogers and the White House Historical Society. Barack and Michelle, welcome home. Welcome home. Jill and I and Kamala and Doug are honored to host you and so many friends who have been part of this incredible journey. It includes members of your cabinet and staff, some of whom were foolish enough to come work with me. And there's someone else that I'd like to acknowledge tonight, Mrs. Robinson. This is your house as well. Good to see. It's good to see you again, Mom. It really is. It's also good to see Miss Wilson, who known affectionately as Mama Kay. One of your best friends, and Malia and Sasha's godmother. And as they say in Southern Delaware, you've done good, kid. And President Kennedy once observed that every president must endure the gap between what he would like and what is possible. He was right. The history books are full of stories about presidents trying to bridge that gap. Stories that include the burdens of the office, the difficult decisions, how the work is always serious and often solemn. And all of that's true. But so is this. With Barack as our president, we got up every day and went to work full of hope, for real, full of purpose, and excited about the possibility before us. There are few people I've ever known with more integrity, decency, and moral courage than Barack Obama. Mr. President, nothing could have prepared me better or more to become President of the United States than be at your side for 8 years. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. You know, no matter what the issue was, no matter how difficult, no matter what it was about, doing it, you never did it just the easy way, what the easy way out was. It was never about doing it that way. It was always about doing what was right, literally. You know, just go down the list of historic presidencies. He never gave up on the simple truth that health care was a right for all Americans. When so many were telling him, including me at one point, take the compromise, take a compromise. We weren't sure we could get anything done on ACA. Think about the compromise. You refused. You went big. And now the Affordable Care Act is there permanently, and it's even being improved on. I remember what you told me. So how can I look those people in the eye and leave anybody behind? You weren't about to do that. You know, his Recovery Act brought America back from a great recession. The auto rescue protected an iconic industry that represents the nation's heart and soul. And there were a whole lot of people Some maybe even in this room that were telling you we should let the industry go bankrupt. We should let it go. But you wouldn't. You persisted. You insisted. And I remember our conversations. And I'm proud. I'm proud we stood together and wouldn't let that happen. You bet on the American worker. You believed in the American worker. Even though we knew it would be controversial, you stood up for hundreds of thousands of dreamers who only know America as their home. It always boggles my mind that I always can't understand that a 3-year-old kid's going to say, no, Mom, leave me on this side of the Rio Grande. You go ahead and go. I'm serious. So they could stay and contribute, and they've contributed incredibly. Their talents, and it's a great generation they represent. I can go on and defend that you've done, expanding civil rights, issue the clarion call on the climate crisis, helped us find that amazing grace, even in darkness. In countless hours, over countless meetings, under intense pressure, we always knew Barack Obama, we always knew what you'd do, what you thought was right, even if it was going to cost you politically. You know, we trusted him, all of you in this room. We believed in him, and we counted on him. And I still do. And I still do. Folks, President, that's why the country elected you twice. That's why you'll be considered one of the most consequential presidents in our history, along with one of the most consequential first ladies. You know, Michelle, he knows, we all know, he couldn't have done it without you. I know I couldn't. In fact, during our week, we had lunch once a week, every week, come hell or high water. And everybody wondered all the important things we talked about. Probably 40% of the time we talked about family. We most talked about our girls and my grandchildren and my children. You embody dignity beyond measure, Michelle. And together, you and Barack made history. You both generated hope for millions of people who were left behind for so long. And it matters. You both did it with such grace and such class. You know, you dreamed big and secured lasting wins for the American people, helping lift their burden with the blessing of hope. It was so underestimated, the notion of just having hope. This is a gift of the Obama presidency to the country and to history. It's a gift I felt personally. And as we used to say in the Senate, Mr. President, excuse the point of personal privilege, you were always there. I remember how you were with me when our son was passing. And I remember the eulogy you gave in his behalf. You'll never fully understand just how much it meant to Jill and me and the entire family. I always remember that night we accepted the nomination in Denver. My granddaughter Finnegan, who's a great friend of your daughter's, came up to our room, and said, "Pop, can we move the beds out of my room?" And I said, "Why do you want to move the beds out of your room?" He said, "Well, so her two sisters and Malia and Sasha, we could all get sleeping bags and lie on the floor and sleep together and watch the convention on the floor." That image of them all together will stay with me forever. And I think it melded our families in ways that it's hard for other people to understand. For 8 years, we grew to be a family for each other and through our highs and our lows. Family from different backgrounds, brought together by a shared value set. And all the things that the families have done together, I imagine there may have been other relationships like this, the president and vice president, but I can't think, none comes to mind. Jill and I have been waiting to host events at the White House for a long time, coming out of the pandemic. And it's fitting that we can do that now by unveiling the portraits of two dear friends and two great Americans who are still held very tightly in the hearts of the American people. Portraits that are going to hang on the walls of this sacred place, the People's House, forever. And a reminder of all here and now for those to come to power that hope and change matters. Barack and Michelle, it's my honor to invite you both to the stage for the unveiling of your official portraits. Come on up.
Yes? Okay. There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, everybody have a seat. Have a seat. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sit down, everybody. Thank you very much. It is great to be back. President and Dr. Biden, Vice President Harris, and Second Gentleman Emhoff, thank you so much for your hospitality. Thanks for letting us invite a few friends to the White House. We will try not to tear up the place. Someone once said that if you're looking for a friend in Washington, get a dog. Our family was lucky enough to have 2 wonderful dogs. But I was even luckier to have a chance to spend 8 years working day and night with a man who became a true partner and a true friend. Joe, it is now America's good fortune to have you as president. You've guided us. You have guided us through some perilous times. You've built on and gone beyond the work we all did together to expand health care, to fight climate change, to advance social justice, and to promote economic fairness. Thanks to your decency and thanks to your strength, maybe most of all thanks to your faith in our democracy and the American people, the country's better off than when you took office, and we should all be deeply grateful for that. So thank you so much. To all the former Obama-Biden staffers who are here in person, some of you are watching at home, thank you for being a part of this. When people ask me what I miss most about the White House years, it is not Air Force One that I talk about, although I miss Air Force One. It's the chance that I had to stand shoulder to shoulder with all of you. To have a chance to witness so many talented, selfless, idealistic, good people working tirelessly every day to make the world better. And for 8 years, and even longer for some of you, I drew on your energy and your dedication and your goodness. You inspired me.
and I never wanted to disappoint you. And I tried to reflect the same heart and character that you displayed every day. Even during the toughest times, it was all of you that kept me going. So it's good to be back, to have a chance to see all of you, and to once again say thank you. Now, as much as I miss our work together, what's been a special joy is to see what's happened since. Because so many of you are doing amazing things, whether it's in government, in the private sector, in academia, or nonprofits. And I'm especially glad to see so many of you serving President Biden, as well as you served me. Although now some of you who, let's face it, you were kids back then, are now in charge and running the show, which is a little shocking. And may also explain some of the gray hairs I'm seeing on some of you. But it validates what I had always hoped, which was that our time together would only be the beginning of incredibly impactful careers. And some of you who I've had a chance to stay in touch with, I'm thrilled to see that you've started families of your own. I am a little disappointed that I haven't heard of anyone naming a kid Barack yet. Or Michelle. But there is still time. Finally, I want to say a special thanks to the White House staff. We had a chance to see them all beforehand. Yes. Yeah. You took incredible care of our family for 8 years, and along the way, you became a part of it. And we have not ever forgotten the kindness that you showed us. Now, when Michelle and I had our portraits unveiled at the National Portrait Gallery a few years back, I said that as far as I could tell, no one in my family tree had ever sat for a portrait before. I certainly had not. And now all of a sudden, we've done it twice. But these portraits have a special significance because, as Joe mentioned, they will hang in the White House alongside portraits of other presidents and first ladies dating back to George and Martha. So it was important to find the right people to paint them. I want to thank Sharon Sprung for capturing everything I love about Michelle. Her grace, her intelligence, and the fact that she's fine. The same. She is. Her portrait is stunning. And I want to thank Robert McCurdy for taking on a much more difficult subject and doing a fantastic job with mine. Robert is known for his paintings of public figures: Toni Morrison, the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Muhammad Ali. But what I love about Robert's work is that he paints people exactly the way they are, for better or worse. He captures every wrinkle on your face, every crease in your shirt. You'll note that he refused to hide any of my gray hairs, refused my request to make my ears smaller. He also talked me out of wearing a tan suit, by the way. His work is so precise that at first glance it looks like a photograph. And Robert also paints his subjects looking straight ahead. So it feels like you're face to face, forming a connection. And that appealed to me, in part because presidents so often get airbrushed, even take on a mythical status, especially after you've gone, and people forget all the stuff they didn't like about you. But what you realize when you're sitting behind that desk, and what I want people to remember about Michelle and me, is that presidents and first ladies are human beings like everyone else. We have our gifts, we have our flaws. You've all experienced mine. We have good days and bad days. We feel the same joy and sadness, frustration and hope. And while it takes a certain amount of self-confidence to be president, there are nights where we lie awake, wondering if this or that decision was the right one. I've always described the presidency as a relay race. You take the baton from someone, you run your leg as hard and as well as you can, and then you hand it off to someone else, knowing that your work will be incomplete. The portraits hanging in the White House chronicle the runners in that race. Each of us tasked with trying to bring the country we love closer to its highest aspirations. And when future generations walk these halls and look up at these portraits, I hope they get a better, honest sense of who Michelle and I were. And I hope they leave with a deeper understanding that if we could make it here, maybe they can too. They can do remarkable things too. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce someone who needs no introduction. Michelle was the best thing about living in the White House, and let me tell you, the pastry chefs here deliver delicious pies on request. So that is saying something. I could not ask for a better life partner, and in my humble opinion, America could not have asked for a better First Lady. Please give it up for Michelle Obama.
Let me thank my husband, first of all, for such spicy remarks. And of course, thank you to Joe and Jill, President Biden, and First Lady Jill Biden. Thank you for inviting us back. This means so much to us. We were saying at lunch that the girls have lived in this house longer than they've lived anywhere. And so this, as odd of a home as this can be, as wonderful as it can be, it is a special place because we raised our girls here. And it means so much to come back to friends and to be able to spend time talking about our girls. And so I am grateful to both of you for the work that you're doing, the love that you're showing us, our staff, and the work that you're doing for this country. Thank you so much. And of course to Vice President Harris, and I love to say this, second gentleman, Imhoff. Let's say it again, second gentleman. You're doing a great job. Thank you for joining us today. And I can't go any further without Of course, acknowledging all of the amazing staff, friends. You're more than staff, you're friends, you're family to us, particularly the people who've been part of my team over the years. I don't have time to name everyone, thank goodness. But you all know who you are, from the campaign to the White House to today. I would not be who I am without your passion and your faith and all the love that you poured into everything that we accomplished together. And it was amazing, historic. What did Sam Cass used to say? Unprecedented. You all mean the world to me. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So thank you. Proud of you, proud of the work that you've done, proud of what you're doing. I also want to take the time to recognize the resident staff. As Barack said, you guys made this a home. We snatched up a few of you all and took you with us. But for those of you who we couldn't bring, we miss you so much. We miss you so much. The best part about this house was you all. So it's so good to see you, and you all look good, so good. I'd also like to recognize Stuart McLaurin, of course, John Rogers. It's been amazing working with you all over the years. I have to recognize Bill Allman, who has been fabulous to work with over the years. And of course, Thelma Golden and my dear friend Michael Smith for their... We are where we are because of their comprehensive and rigorous work to identify these incredible artists. And that brings me to our artist, of course, Robert McCurdy, who, you did a good job. did a good job. But I got to spend a lot of time with Sharon Sprung. And Sharon now joins a small but mighty group of women who've painted an official portrait here at the White House. And I'm thrilled that this extraordinary work is going to be enshrined forever as part of our nation's history. But Sharon, it was wonderful to work with you. You are a true spirit. That's one of the reasons why we connected. Your work is phenomenal, but it was your essence, your soul, the way you saw me, the way we interacted, and it shows in this beautiful work. So thank you for your brilliance, your artistry, and your patience in this process. I remember I went to see the work in Brooklyn, and poor Sharon, because no one is supposed to know who the artists are, so her studio is her home. And so she had this piece in her home. You couldn't have guests over. You were frightened that it would get out. You just wanted it out of your space. And every year I thought about, she must be going crazy. So thank you. Thank you so much. Let's give them both a round of applause. Believe it or not, it is still a bit odd for me to stand in this historic space, see this big, beautiful painting staring back at me. Growing up on Euclid Avenue, Mommy, I never could have imagined that any of this would be part of my story. But even if it's all still a bit awkward for me, I do recognize why moments like these are important. Why all of this is absolutely necessary. Traditions like this matter, not just for those of us who hold these positions, but for everyone participating in and watching our democracy. You see, the people, they make their voices heard with their vote. We hold an inauguration to ensure a peaceful transition of power. Those of us lucky enough to serve, work, as Barack said, as hard as we can for as long as we can, as long as the people choose to keep us here. And once our time is up, we move on. And all that remains in this hallowed place are our good efforts and these portraits. Portraits that connect our history to the present day. Portraits that hang here as history continues to be made. So for me, this day is not just about what has happened, it's also about what could happen. Because a girl like me, she was never supposed to be up there next to Jacqueline Kennedy and Dolly Madison. She was never supposed to live in this house, and she definitely wasn't supposed to serve as First Lady.
Love you, Michelle.
Love you back. But I've always wondered, where does that supposed to come from? Who determines it? And too often in this country, people feel like they have to look a certain way or act a certain way to fit in, that they have to make a lot of money or come from a certain group or class or faith in order to matter. But what we're looking at today, a portrait of a biracial kid with an unusual name and the daughter of a water pump operator and a stay-at-home mom. What we are seeing is a reminder that there's a place for everyone in this country. Because as Barack said, the two of us can end up on the walls of the most famous address in the world. Then again, it is so important for every young kid who is doubting themselves to believe that they can too. That is what this country is about. It's not about blood or pedigree or wealth. It's a place where everyone should have a fair shot. Whether you're a kid taking 2 buses and a train just to get to school, or a single mother who's working 2 jobs to put some food on the table, or an immigrant just arriving, getting your first apartment, forging a future for yourself in a place you dreamed of. That's why for me, this day isn't about me or Barack. It's not even about these beautiful paintings. It's about telling that fuller story, a story that includes every single American in every single corner of the country so that our kids and grandkids can see something more for themselves. And as much as some folks might want us to believe that that story has lost some of its shine, that division and discrimination and everything else might have dimmed its light, I still know, deep in my heart, that what we share, as my husband continues to say, is so much bigger than what we don't. Our democracy is so much stronger than our differences. And this little girl from the South Side is blessed beyond measure to have felt the truth of that fuller story throughout her entire life, never more so than today. So thank you to President Biden, to Sharon, and to all of you today for playing a part in this day and all the days that led to it. And now it is my privilege to introduce someone who is stepping in shoes and doing it well, someone who has devoted so much of her life to education, working to broaden the idea of whose story matters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend, First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden.
Joe, honestly, everybody stood but Joe. Thank you, Michelle, for a friendship I treasure. 14 years ago, Michelle, on a cold night in November, a sea of people gathered in Grant Park to be a part of history. There was laughter and music and dancing. There were tears as friends and strangers alike held each other, overwhelmed with the joy that hope and change had been realized. The crowd roared, radiating the sense that anything we could dream was within our reach. But at the heart of that enormous moment was a family. 2 little girls who would grow up exploring the secret halls and hideaways of the White House. A mom who would bring her whole heart to serving the American people as First Lady, while still guiding and protecting her family with a ferocious devotion. A grandmother who would do absolutely anything for the family she loves, and even move to Washington, D.C. And a father who showed the world the meaning of yes, we can. For Joe and me and our entire family, standing on that stage next to you was like waking up in a new world, a place where, with hard work, anything was possible. And it wasn't just the Bidens. So many of you were also there. You remember how it felt. It was magic, wasn't it? That night, your family connected us all. And our family, the Obama-Biden team, every one of you who were fired up and ready to go, together, we changed the course of this country forever. And when I look at these portraits, I see family. Your family, the family we all built, and the families across America that we served together. I see love, joy, and fellowship, and we are honored to hang them today and share them with the world. So thank you for being with us. And now please join us in the State Dining Room for a reception. Thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats while the President and Dr. Biden, President and Mrs. Obama, and the Vice President and Second Gentleman depart.
Portraits of the Obamas, America's first African-American president and first lady, now have their portraits gracing the walls of the White House, their former home for 8 years. The artist Robert McCurdy painted the portrait of former President Barack Obama, and artist Sharon Sprung painted the portrait of Michelle Obama. Today was also a reunion of a former president and vice president, now president, and the renewal of a tradition. Let's start with Hannah Jewell, who joins me from outside the White House with highlights from this afternoon's presentation of the portraits. Hannah?
Well, Libby, as expected, we've just seen this very warm ceremony in which all the participants, Obama, Biden, the First Ladies, and former First Lady, really emphasized the closeness of their families and how they missed that time, and the White House staffers, and a lot of warm acknowledgments of each other's legacies. We had Biden in particular talking about the Obama daughters and his granddaughters, grandchildren, hanging out, having sleepovers, playing together, the warmth of that. And he also said that Obama would be one of the most consequential presidents in American history, and noted that hope was the fundamental gift of the Obama presidency. Following that, Obama spoke. He said that Biden was a true partner and a true friend. He said that the country is better off than when he had taken office. He joked that he missed Air Force One, having access to that in the White House chef, but also, most of all, missed the former staffers of 8 years in White House staff. And he made a joke about how the artist Robert McCurdy did not allow him to pose in a tan suit, in a reference to a very sort of a political scandal that really feels like it came from another universe, let alone another time. So the artists, Robert McCurdy and Sharon Sprung, we got to see their works. Robert McCurdy, this photorealistic painter who has painted such luminaries as Nelson Mandela, Jane Goodall, the Dalai Lama, Muhammad Ali, among others. And Sharon Sprung, who's a sort of lesser-known artist, a Brooklyn-based artist and art teacher who, as Michelle Obama in her speech noted, will be one of the few women painters to have done an official White House portrait and to hang on those walls. Michelle Obama also thanked the artist for her patience because this had to be kept top secret, but Sharon Sprung lives in her studio, so she couldn't have guests over, Michelle Obama said, in order to not conceal the fact that there was a portrait of the former First Lady there. And Michelle Obama noted the significance that she saw of that moment. She said, a girl like me was never supposed to hang up there with Jacqueline Kennedy, and talked about her story leading to the White House. And we heard from Dr. Jill Biden, the current First Lady also, who remembered the emotions of the 2008 election night and that time in history. And just a warm ceremony all around, lots of emphasis on the closeness of the families and respect for each other's presidential achievements. Libby?
Hannah Jewell, thank you so much. James, we're seeing go by these cameras a real who's who of the Obama years.
Yeah, and there's Anita Dunn and her husband, Bob Bauer. We're seeing a lot of folks, not just from the administration, but also from the Obama campaign. Joel Benenson, who was Barack Obama's pollster, just walked by, as did David Axelrod, who was the chief strategist on the 2008 and 2012 campaigns. Lots of people from the White House, everyone from Tom Perez, the labor secretary who just lost the Democratic primary for governor of Maryland, to Avril Haines, who was a deputy national security advisor. There's Jake Sullivan, the current national security advisor in the green tie, and who's now the director of national intelligence. There's Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the current Secretary of Homeland Security and was also in the Obama administration. So,
you have to wonder what's going through all of their minds as they take this moment to reflect on their time here in this building that they are so familiar with, but also, so much has happened since then, not just in their own professional lives, but in the state of the country.
It really is remarkable how much has changed in 5 years and how much has changed in 10 years since the last time that the White House had one of these portrait unveilings, when Mitt Romney, not Donald Trump, was the Republican standard bearer. And I was reminded of one of Joe Biden's favorite lines from his stump speech in the 2012 campaign today, when he would say, Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive. And he noted early in his remarks that there were people in that very room who had encouraged President Obama to let the auto companies like General Motors, there's Larry Summers, in fact, go bankrupt. And that Obama showed the courage to not do that, trying to give the president credit for the recovery from the Great Recession.
Such humble and historic comments from former First Lady Michelle Obama as she reflected not just on the significance of these portraits, but of the symbolism of her and her husband's time in office, James.
It was a remarkable speech. I found myself wishing that Joe Biden had given that speech last Thursday night in Philadelphia. It was remarkably it captured exactly what Joe Biden was trying to do with that speech at Independence Hall.
I just want to interrupt you briefly to say there's the artist Sharon Sprung there who painted the former First Lady's portrait. We also saw McCurdy go by a few moments ago who painted Barack Obama's portrait.
Yeah, it was a really powerful meditation on democracy. And Barack Obama also, I thought, made that point really well. And in fact, it sort of explains the decision to go with a super realist painter who, as Barack Obama said, captures you warts and all, doesn't get rid of the wrinkles, doesn't make your ears any smaller, and captures who you are exactly. And I think that that's something that has become really important for a lot of us to recognize over the last 5 years, to your question, Libby, which is that we've seen over the last 5 years since Obama left office how we can't just take for granted democracy and our institutions working, that it does depend on individuals, and that all people are imperfect and have strengths and weaknesses and flaws. But as the former president was saying, it's a relay race, and when you start that you're not going to get to the end of the race, but you run and pass the baton as best you can. And I think we've seen the last couple of years, you can't necessarily count on that baton being passed on forever, that it really does depend on someone handing it off and someone else taking it.
Well, let's bring in Philip Kennicott, the Post's art and architecture critic. Okay, Philip, I am dying to hear your initial reactions to and observations of the portraits of the former president and first lady.
Well, the first thing I was struck by is how different they are from each other. In the history of portraiture, when a married couple had their portraits made, they were often done by the same artist, and they would meant to be in kind of communion with each other. The style would be the same, they would be dressed perhaps in a similar mode, and they might even be looking at each other across the mantel or the fireplace. Just as they did with the National Portrait Gallery artists, again, here, they have gone with two very, very different kinds of portraiture, two very different sensibilities. The former president is seen in an almost monochromatic against a white background. His suit looks to be black. The tie is gray or silvery, giving away very little color in any sense. Whereas the portrait of Michelle Obama is wonderfully soft in its hues. It looks to be a red sofa, a light blue dress, a kind of sunset in the background. I think the one thing these two images have in common is that they don't tell us much about what is going through the minds of the two people who are staring back at us. And that may be intentional. The photorealistic style of Robert McCurdy is really meant to limit the data that we get. We get just the person standing in front of you. Reading up a little bit on his method, he actually tells his subjects not to smile. Don't do anything, don't gesture, just you and the camera. And that's been a very popular mode, especially with CEOs. Jeff Bezos, the man who owns the Washington Post, has a very similar Robert McCurdy portrait. And I think it's about the idea that somehow you can eliminate everything extraneous, of a kind of business-like quality of getting just down to the essential details. The portrait, Sharon Sprung's portrait of Michelle Obama, is in a more academic mode. It's softer. There is more of a sense, I think, of trying to give a sense of her psychology. But again, she's got a fairly inscrutable look on her face. Now, that said, I think these paintings will fit fairly well. I don't think they're going to be seen as in any way disruptive to the traditions of portraiture in the White House, which is more conservative. Even the McCurdy portrait of Obama, which does break by using this photorealistic style, it's still very traditional in its pose and its manner. This is a man of great power, standing, looking directly at you.
Philip, it's interesting when you talk about the pictures in relationship to each other. Talk to us about how they reflect this age and this moment, because there is something so revolutionary and true about this moment, whoever the First Lady is, that she is her own person, right? That she has her own decisions and her own autonomy on everything from portraiture and who paints her to the self that she presents to the American public. So talk to us about how these pieces reflect their times.
Right. So, I think when Michelle Obama came into office, there was no way she could successfully negotiate all the things that would be thrown at her, all of the tensions and divisions. If she was too feminine, that would be held against her. If she was too strong in her role, that would be held against her. And I think what she did very successfully was kind of set all of that aside and be herself. And I do get a sense of her in this portrait wanting to be relaxed, wanting to seem at her ease and herself. And I think, maybe it's too much to read into it, maybe not, but that slightly autumnal color in the background, to me, suggests somebody who made it through the storm. The clouds are going off in the distance, and we're seeing that color that you sometimes see when a great thunderstorm at sunset is just on its way out. It's that wonderful, gorgeous kind of light. I wonder if there's something of that in that. She's made it through those trials.
James, talk to us more about McCurdy and the history of who he's painted, who else he's painted.
Yeah, so McCurdy, we heard Barack Obama mention that he had previously painted Toni Morrison. And we know from an interview that McCurdy did with the White House Historical Association that during the interview process, Obama discussed that Toni Morrison painting. But other subjects include Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, Neil Armstrong, Jane Goodall, the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and others including Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post.
So, Philip, to you about that starkness of that picture, because you talked about how the pose is very much in line with other presidential poses, but that whiteness is so modern, right? I mean, it almost looks like an Apple ad or something with just like that simplicity. How does that reflect this age?
I think the artist may be borrowing something from contemporary theater. There is a mode of theater that says if you get rid of the costumes and the props and the fancy lighting and all the extraneous stuff, you can really focus on what matters, and that's the text and the actors. And I think that's sort of what's going on here. I remember at some point, I hope this is true and our political people will know better, but that Obama was famous for sort of having a pretty limited wardrobe and not putting a lot of thought into it. You know, he would kind of reach in and put on the uniform, which was the suit, and didn't want to waste a lot of time with that kind of stuff. You heard him today emphasize the idea of the presidency as a relay race, and each president runs as hard as they can and then passes off the baton. So in those remarks, and I think in this painting, he's emphasizing the fact that this, for him, was hard work. This was a sprint. This is just the essentials. Nothing, no frippery, no extraneous stuff.
Well, let's watch a moment from the former president's remarks just a few moments ago as his portrait was unveiled.
I've always described the presidency as a relay race. You take the baton from someone, you run your leg as hard and as well as you can, and then you hand it off to someone else, knowing that your work will be incomplete. The portraits hanging in the White House chronicle the runners in that race. Each of us tasked with trying to bring the country we love closer to its highest aspirations. And when future generations walk these halls and look up at these portraits, I hope they get a better, honest sense of who Michelle and I were. And I hope they leave with a deeper understanding that if we could make it here, maybe they can too.
Remarks from the former president earlier. Philip, I'd like to hear your interpretation of how the former president and first lady talked about these paintings and how they are already reflecting on how they are being remembered by Americans.
Well, they had two very different ways of thinking about the relationship with the artist. Former President Obama stressed the fact that the artist didn't lie, didn't fudge anything, didn't change his ears or flatter him in any way. The former First Lady spoke warmly of a connection with the artist. I think that's reflected in the way the paintings work as well. I would point out that photorealism is not actually any more honest or direct or truthful than any other kind of painting. I would point you to one detail. It may be hard to see if you're watching this on a screen, but perhaps you can get a better resolution image. You'll see that there are reflections on the forehead of the former president that have been meticulously painted in. For what reason? To create the illusion that this is actually a photograph. So the painter has used his enormous skills and technique to create a facsimile of a photograph. So there is a little conceit going on here, as there is in any portrait.
Let's go to Rhonda Colvin, who was live in the East Room earlier today as these portraits were being unveiled. Rhonda, talk to us about the atmosphere in the room. We really got a sense that it was packed in there, that this was sort of a joyful return home. What were your observations?
Yeah, it was certainly packed in there. It was standing room only in the back. The seats were full. And that goes back to what the White House said, the Biden White House said last year. They wanted this event. They wanted to continue the tradition, but they wanted to wait until COVID restrictions were lifted where they could have a normal or semi-normal amount of people in the East Room there. And it was a very jovial experience. You got the sense that some of the former administration officials from the Obama White House were happy to see each other. There was a collegiality there in the room. It was almost a little giddy as well. They were just all very happy to be there. And you also got the sense that a lot of people were just excited to go go back to a norm that we haven't seen for a while. So that was sort of the sense that I got in the room. Of course, the former first couple, the Obamas, are very popular, and you could tell that in the room. And one of the things that stood out to me is they both spent time thanking the staff. The former president, he thanked his White House staff, but also the staff in the household. And Mrs. Obama did the same thing. But what was so striking, and I believe the former First Lady did allude to this, is that sense of historical progress that this day is about. When they unveiled the portraits, I looked up, and you see George Washington and Martha Washington on both sides of these new portraits. And right there, that's visible progress in America. And Mrs. Obama took her time to talk about that. She alluded a little bit to the current politics, the contention that we experience a lot in our politics right now, but she painted a bit of a hopeful tone in what these portraits might mean, that they show that a couple like them, she said, they weren't supposed to be there, but if they made it there, that should give hope to the American audience past the times that we're currently experiencing.
Let's listen to some of former First Lady Michelle Obama's remarks.
Traditions like this matter, not just for those of us who hold these positions, but for everyone participating in and watching our democracy. You see, the people, they make their voices heard with their vote. We hold an inauguration to ensure a peaceful transition of power. Those of us lucky enough to serve work, as Barack said, as hard as we can for as long as we can, as long as the people choose to keep us here. And once our time is up, we move on. And all that remains in this hallowed place are our good efforts and these portraits.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama earlier. So Rhonda Colvin, back to you. She was really already stepping into that lens of history and reflecting on her place in it, both her presence and place as First Lady Michelle Obama, but also her presence and place as the first African-American First Lady of the United States.
Yeah, and if you remember, that was something that she never shied away talking about, even when they were in office. I remember when she gave that speech at the DNC back when Hillary Clinton was accepting the nomination, for the Democratic nomination for president. You'll remember that Mrs. Obama gave that line about she wakes up every day in a house built by slaves, and how that is impressed upon her that shows progress in America, that she, a descendant of slaves, is waking up in this house as a part of the first family. So that's something that we have heard from her before, and that is something that she used her time today to really talk about and to focus on. It struck me that the first couple didn't really talk about some of the legislative achievements or any of those things, but they really brought that sense of hope to those watching, and that was what they were really famous for back in the early days of their first candidacy. They talked a lot about hope, and you saw that same tone come out today.
Fascinating, James, how different that thought of hope feels now in contrast to sort of what the nation has been through in the past 5 years. Let's talk more about the selection of Sharon Sprung and how the former First Lady chose her to be this artist that would create her representation to hang in the White House.
So she actually chose her and sat for some of the initial sittings while they were still in the White House before the Trump era. Initially, Philip was talking about the process for how spouses usually had the same painter. Initially, she was just going to interview with Michelle Obama, but Barack Obama hadn't decided who he wanted to paint his portrait. So unexpectedly, the president sat in on their meeting, and we're getting some new details about how they were going and talking, and she was reading Gone Girl while she was sitting outside the Oval Office because she was so nervous to go in and meet with the president. And she had prepared talking points because she had thought that that's what you're supposed to do when you meet with the president. And so she brings in this piece of paper and her hands are shaking nervously, and Obama sets down the piece of paper, and he says, well, I just want to talk. I want to understand your perspective. And initially, she's kind of going on, and then one of the Obama aides says, Sharon, why do you paint? And it was such a piercing question that in Sharon Sprung's recollection, she started crying and talking about how she had gotten into painting and how she had overcome all these obstacles. And so then Michelle chooses her. Barack Obama obviously goes a different direction. And two things really stick out as part of this process. The first is that Sharon Sprung asks the First Lady, how do you want to be painted? What do you want to convey? What do you want to get across? And Michelle Obama says, you know what? I haven't really given it a lot of thought. You do you. I trust you. You're the expert. You're the painter. And she said that that's the first time a subject has ever done that before. The subject always says, well, I want to convey my warmth or something like that. And so she was sort of struck by the humility of that. And then the second piece that came through is initially Sharon Sprung had planned to do this as a standing painting, that she was going to have Michelle Obama standing, and it was because she thought that if she had her sitting, it wouldn't convey her dignity. But then she ultimately concluded, after taking a lot of photos and doing some various sketches, that she didn't need to be sitting because she had so much natural dignity. Didn't need to be standing. She had so much natural dignity that she decided she could do it sitting, because just looking at her, she just oozes with that. I was surprised, based on her background as a painter, as a modern contemporary painter, how traditional it did look. I mean, it's a gorgeous painting, and at one point she said they were sort of struggling to get something just right, and Michelle Obama's stylist was in the room and walked over and played with the First Lady's hair, and then she said that was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted. Like, hold that hair right there, right like that, and that's the final product that we saw in that gorgeous painting a few minutes ago.
So, Philip Kennicott, before we let you go, I'd like to hear your final thoughts and observations on today, this return to tradition, and these paintings. You know,
I think that today's ceremony will actually matter more than the images themselves. You know, as I said earlier, there are millions and billions of pictures of the Obamas, and we already have two that are greatly beloved already from 2018. These are perfectly good portraits, and they will hold their own in the White House. They will hold the place for the Obamas as successive administrations come. What mattered today was that there was a return to a tradition that needs to be strengthened and needs to be supplemented by other similar traditions, in which we see the White House accepting the fact that administrations change, politics change, parties change, people come and go, and you cannot have a situation in which one political party wants simply to erase the other, rather than simply debate, argue, negotiate, compromise to erase. If we look back at one of the most striking moments of the previous presidency, it was the very end, when the outgoing president didn't come to the inauguration. The precursor of that event, I think, was the one that didn't happen, that was replaced by the event today. And that was the refusal of the previous president to welcome these images into the White House and to live with them.
Philip Kennicott, thank you so much. Let's go to Rhonda Colvin for final thoughts there on the White House lawn. She was in the East Room today. Rhonda.
Yeah, similarly to what Philip just said, today seemed to be about that return to norms. Of course, there was that interruption during the time of the Trump administration where this ceremony wasn't held. Also, COVID was an interruption because this White House wanted to wait until they could have more people here to experience this moment. So we are experiencing something today that we haven't, and even, you know, a generation may not be that familiar with what happened today. But this sort of felt a little bit like a reset. Of course, it was, you know, less than an hour, but it felt like something that went back to old norms, and we had a little bit of nostalgia. And that's important because a lot of our reporting right now is about, you know, the continuing investigation into January 6th. We're getting ready for what might be a very contentious election in November, but yet we still have these norms that are being celebrated, and if just for a few minutes, that's quite important for history's sake.
Rhonda Colvin, James Homan, Philip Kennicott, Robin Gavon, Hannah Jewell, and all of our colleagues, including Tyler Pager. Thank you so much to all of you. Well, it was a mix today of new and old, new portraits and an old tradition, and a reunion of the Obama White House and its top staffers. We'd like to thank you for watching today's unveiling of these new portraits of former President Obama and former First Lady Obama. We appreciate you watching with the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. We hope to see you soon again.
Sometimes you have to see to believe and witness history as it unfolds. When the news is breaking, watch with the newsroom of The Washington Post. We explain what's happening and why it matters. Thank you for choosing to watch the headlines as they're being written by our journalists. You can subscribe with a special offer at washingtonpost.com/watch. Subscribing through that link lets everyone here, from the front lines to the control room, know that you care about our continued efforts to inform the public, protect the First Amendment, and foster a healthy democracy. We could not do this without you.